Hello, I'm Ken, and we're here to make the fourth and final video of the making of the Scottish motor fishing vessel, the Fifie. And it's been a fun build so far for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I want to thank you for tuning in. And this is where we're going to finish all the deck equipment and cabins and fishing gear. And I'm going to find some netting and maybe make some fish. That would be a lot of fun. And so with that, let's get to it. The next task is to assemble these 4 scuttles, which allow fresh air and fish to go down into the hold. And I've been having a bit of a problem to get repeatability in my process. I'd like all 4 to look the same. So what I ended up doing is cutting a square which fits on one of these scuttles and then wrapping wood around it like this I've done here and measured the lengths of these guys. I'm starting to cut the pieces that represent the outline of the scuttle. And I think I have a repeatable process. Well, building those squares off board didn't work quite as well as I thought it would. I got the sizes right and the square fits the scuttles very nice. And I laid these cross beams that are going to hold up the decking here. And when I put the scuttle surround on, it looked good, but when I laid the decking plank on here, they were misaligned. One was higher than the other, and it really showed. It was a millimeter off, but it really showed in my mind. So I kind of lifted up that square to pull it off, and it came unglued at the corners and was 4 little pieces. So I slid it down and got them even, glued it back on, and maybe it would have been easier just if I built the squares right on the deck. I'm not sure which one's which, but it looks okay now. But in the process, I got my wood glue all over these little planks, and then they didn't show so good. And so I then got some Varathane sealer out and painted that up, and that seemed to hide all the glue, the staining from the glue. So that looks good. So I'm back on track, no big deal, but it just wasn't quite as efficient as I thought it would be. So now I'm in the process of, I got these 3 laid, now I'm going to lay these here. So I finished the grating here, installed that, and painted the scuttles black, put them in there. What I think takes place is the net brings the fish on board, the water drains away, and the fish are then loaded down these scuttles into the hold, or the superstructures hatches are open and they're tossed into the hold, something like that. But there were no scuppers on the side. So I cut some in the side here, and you can see them back here. Kind of token scuppers. There probably would be more on a real boat, and that lets the water drain off. But as I go along, I see that my little ribbing on here to protect from the dock is getting worn from going in and out of my foam holder. So I think now is the time to get the stand prepared, and that's what I have been working on. So I painted my stand gloss black, and I really think that's a good contrast in there. But the problem I had is I didn't seal it properly, and the stand, the MDF, kept sucking up the paint. And I painted and painted and painted, and finally it dawned on me, and especially on the edges here is where it was really sucking in the paint. So I took it and sanded it all down and used 2 coats of sealer, and then went back and painted 2 or 3 coats of black, gloss black, and that seemed to work pretty good. But when I put the boat in the stand, the stern stayed too high, and it wasn't setting in the proper position relative to the water line. So I had to take it back out, take the boat off the stand, and sand the leading edge here of the stern so that it would settle into the cradle like it was supposed to. Which means now I have to paint the stand again, because I don't want that white to show. And then I found the boat is getting marked from the stand, and I think it was mostly sanding dust, but I got to check for scratches and I can repaint that, I suppose. But what I decided to do was to add these little felt pads to the cradle. My boat was trailered and it sat on a cradle, and I think motorboats and other boats do that too. And even though the Fife is not a trailer boat, I think I'm going to protect it on the stand with felt. Well, with all that jigging around, I got the deck completed mostly. I got the stand painted glossy and squared up with the felt liners on there. And I got the stern 20 millimeters lower than the bow, and the bottom of the white line seems to be even with the water line. So with that, let's start looking at the equipment on the deck. Next, I decided to install the rudder. This consisted of laying planks top to bottom along the rudder and then trimming them up on the outline so that it would hold the brackets and make room for the propeller. As you can see here, I planked part of it, and then when I finish, I turn it over and do the other side. I've got this side done, and now I'm working on the other side. As you can see here, I pressed the nail in the hole using my pliers. I used electrical tape around the grip so it didn't mark things. Other times I used a hammer, other times I used a nail pusher. It just depended on the angle and the grip I could get. So these are the rudder hinges. There's 3 pairs. I put this one on the bottom, down as low and in as best I could. This one sits on here like this. And then I guess this attaches to the rudder itself. And I guess this little tab here, you can see it there. If it rides on the black hinge there, then I guess it kind of makes sense. Maybe down a little lower, there we go. And then there's barely enough room for a nail to go in there. But if I glue it and put some nails in, I think that looks like it's the way it's supposed to be. Let me get my paperwork out and see if I got it right. Boy, this has not been easy. I very carefully mounted the bottom hinge on here, nice and square per some of the pictures. None of the pictures in the instructions were all that clear. And I pushed it in as far as I could and down as low as I could. So I glued it in, pounded the nails, and I'm still not sure. So then I put this hinge on here, and it looks like it rides pretty good. But it was riding high, and it turns out it's asymmetrical. It's a big hole at the top, but it's a small hole underneath you can't see, and the pin didn't go all the way down. So I sanded it a little shorter so that it rode down lower. That was a good thing. So I finally mounted the bottom hinge on the rudder and on the stern of the boat. So I repeated the process. I put the bottom in and decided where the hinge would lie on the middle portion, and I bent this hinge up so that it would wrap around the stern and the bow. Kind of put the two together, marked it with a pencil, drilled some holes. I haven't put the holes on the bow, on the stern yet. And it seemed to be just below the white line, which is nice. And that looks okay. This was kind of hard to get this down as low as I can. I ended up doing some sanding, making that a little deeper. And I'd like it to have the same gap all the way down. It looks like it's leaning back a little bit. I can live with that. And but the reason I haven't mounted it to the boat yet is I want to take this and I want to go downstairs and paint it red. So I got to put a white line on here and seal this up, seal the hinges themselves, and then paint it the same color as this boat. Come up and paint the boat red as well, where I've marked it and dinged it, and then later on I'll put a white line on there, and then I'll just use a sealer on this upper part here, so it'll have that tricolor look. The other thing I thought of is this propeller here. I got to make sure that it lines up with this curve for the propeller. So when I put this in, it doesn't actually spin properly. But if I glue it so it's up higher, then it does. So it looks like I'm good. Well, here's the finished rudder. It took me a while to do this, but I'm quite happy with the results. Alright, the next little doodad to build is the steam winch assembly. Some of these parts are to be painted black, and that's what I'll do. And we're supposed to have 8 of these little ones. I don't know what they call these things here, but I only got provided 7 in my kit. So I cut one of my own. We'll see, maybe I'll use 7 or I'll try the one I built. So here it is all assembled. I painted the parts black. They say you could paint the brass, but I think I like to leave it natural. There's a little hole in the deck for this. And this represents the steam winch. There's a little copper pipe that goes with it. Then I drilled a hole right here for it. It goes in the side of the boat. I put a hole in the side of the boat, and I'll assemble them all together later once I build each individual part. Some of the deck equipment was pretty simple to assemble. The bus rope latch assembly was one of those. It's a few parts, not too complicated. The instructions are pretty clear. I think this is where a hatch lets the rope come up to deal with the nets. And I painted it my usual dark cherry. The rope roller assembly is another one of those fairly easy parts, but tiny parts to go. This goes on the side of the boat and pulls the net in. You cut these little pins about 13 millimeters. No, they were 11 millimeters long. And then you put these 9 millimeter copper tubes over them. And you put a 4 millimeter copper tube. Then you put these little bus bar assemblies on the top. And you use this little piece here and you attach it to the deck. And it sits on the side of the boat. The completed rope roller assembly. The deck hand pump assembly. Next was the wheel assembly. So I started working on the superstructure, and the first thing to do is the pilot house. And that turned out to be a little bit more complex. I made good progress. I painted the inside white. I see it kind of gets dark in there when you seal it all up, so it may be for nothing. But I've made some gauges that would help display how the engine's going to run. And I put a clock on the wall, and I don't think I'm going to do too much more than that. And there's quite a little bit of detail in that, but I'm on my way to getting it done. And then once these sides are put up, you put another side up like this on the outside, and you panel it. And there's all kinds of trim that goes around the paneling here, like this. And it goes around the window. And there's got to be a top. I think I'm going to paint the top white. And color scheme has always been troublesome for me. What's a good color scheme? And the pilot house goes right here, but they got all these fish hatches here. And I've been playing with what color, and I'm thinking the color on these hatches probably needs to complement what's in the pilot house. And so I've been playing with a wood color, and I think I like this darker brown. I'm going to paint these brown, and then I'll put the trim around the house on the outside of this as a darker brown, and it will complement. Now this wheelhouse was far more complex than I had imagined. Some of the corners just didn't fit right for me. These joined, but there was a big gap here. Fortunately, what we're going to do is we're going to put a little 1x2 there and block it off, but I had to sand this down. It's taken a lot of sanding to get this right. And here's an example. Let me zoom in so you can see it. I sanded this down here, and so now this piece sort of fits nice per the instructions. But if I rotate it over to here, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a sharp edge here, so I'm going to have to sand that down so it doesn't kind of roll. That puts kind of a flat spot on there, so this part fits on there. And all of these corners seem to be, I had to sand this down, and I have a little gap in the bottom. I don't think that's going to show. But there is a little gap on the top. Let me put this top on here. I've done everything I can to make these things fit, but somehow I missed the mark. And that's easily fixed. I've got this little 1x1 that'll fit right up there when it comes time to put the top on. I don't know if that'll show or not. As you can see here, I finished putting on all the siding, the back door, the hinges, the handle, some of the interior instruments that I produced on my own, the window frames, and I'm ready to put the lid on and start the attachments on the outside. Well, I think I'm complete for the wheelhouse proper, but there's several things that need to be attached on the outside. I got to build a water tank and attach it. Then there's these herring shovels that are over here. I painted the bracket black, and I'll put those in and then assemble those. And they got these things called life belts. And the life belts and their holders are here, and I'll attach them on. And there is the navigation lighthouse that goes up red and green. Then there is the boom support that goes. And then I think this completes the wheelhouse proper. I am preparing to put these fish hatch covers on the superstructure here. And I figured out what color I'm going to paint them, and I've sanded these little hatches so that they're right mount fit. There was quite a bit of adjustment to get all 26 of them fitting in there. But the real problem I'm struggling with now, and what I'm going to show you, how I'm putting these little ring bolts together. I assume I'm going to drill these little holes out a little bit larger. Then you put this pin with a ring in it into the little hole in the two corners. So here you can see the ring is in the little pin, but they give us these rings separate from the little pins. And it's hard to get them in. So here's the process I've been following. And I grab one of these posts and I run the thin wire into the little hole, which assures me that the hole is clear to receive the ring and allows me to position this post on my vise in a repeatable manner, the hole facing me basically. So what I figured so far is you take one of these rings and you unwrap it. And you take one end and you flatten it out with a pair of pliers. Because if it's curved, it doesn't go through the hole, too much resistance. But if it's flat, it fits through the hole. And once you get that flat part through the hole, then you got to turn around and roll it back. This one's not quite as round as a lot of them are, because I was doing it for the camera. But it looks okay. Only 50 more times. Well, I finished painting and drilling holes in the fish hatch covers and installing those little rings, and I'm ready to move on to the next task. Here's the aft mast assembly. I've cut and tapered the masts and found all the components, the hardware components, and now I need to assemble them. So I struggled with putting these blocks on all the spars and rings and cleats and everything else we have on the boat. And I read lots of paper, but actually putting it into practice has been difficult for me. So this is the rig I've arranged. First, I tie off the string or the line around this copper tube and put a touch of glue so it holds. And then I suspend this block above that little knot and tie another knot around it. So that gives you what you get down here below. Now let me shoot it from a better angle. This is what it looks like. So you can see here below on this other block there's a little ring on the end of the block that attaches to the metal ring, and that keeps the metal from working on the wood. And that's what I've done up here by tying onto the copper. I've finished most of the deck items that go on the boat. There's a few more that need to go on, but I think I need to assemble these now so I can get the right position and angles for everything that's going up. Those masts will require quite a bit of work with all their stays and shrouds and to get the mast at the right angle. And once that's done, I can go on to do the little rowboat. So in order to get my mast fixed the way I wanted to, straight, even athwartships and at the right rake and everything, I thought I would do is tie these shrouds off to the ring up front before I installed it. So all 6 shrouds are got a loop that go through the ring, and then I've seized them on together here so that it doesn't come off. But they're not attached on the bottom end. And I did that off the boat, laying on the table. And that was a trick unto itself, but I managed it. Here in this photograph, you can see where I'm going. You finish the bottom end of the shrouds by seizing a thimble on the bottom. And then you put some lashings, put another thimble, and then you tie it to a cleat or a ring on the railing. Seizing these little thimbles down here on the bottom so that they're off the deck at a semi-even space along there is kind of tricky. The one back here is tied to a block that is winched back to adjust it, and these little thimbles are tied to the end of this rope and then lashed to the deck as shown here. As you can see here, I practiced before I did all that work on my shrouds, first to tie a loop onto a simulated ring and then lashed or seized the line around so that I get a nice loop, and I did all 6 of those. And now I'm in the process of putting these little thimbles, tying a rope around, tying the line around there and seizing them on. And that wasn't so easy. So while I was squeezing this line here, one of these guys just shot off and I could not find it. It's lost in the rug somewhere or landed in some equipment or something. And I always given about 8 or 10 of those. There wasn't very many of them, so I can't afford to lose too many of them. So in the process, I decided to put a ring around that, and like this, and then seize the line to that. Kind of makes it a little more complicated, but if it does take off, which it hasn't since, I can find it. Here's the other side. I've seized those little rings on there, and I got to still trim some of the seizing line off and some of the leftover shroud. I'm leaving them on there just in case I made a mistake. But here they come down. The little line is seized. I'll get rid of those rings, and then I'll put the lashings down to hold it onto the deck. Now that I have my 6 stays attached to the ring up here, it's time to put a thimble here on the bottom of each stay that then goes to a set of lines that go to the deck. And I found it a little bit difficult dealing with these little tiny thimbles. They're very tiny. And I wanted to get the distance just right as well, so this is the rig I've used. I sent a ruler up, attached it to the bottom of the ring, pulled this tight, and at 29 millimeters is what I measured, 23 millimeters, excuse me, is what I measured off the drawing, is where there's a little loop here. And I got to put this little thimble in that loop and then seize it to that line. So I've put on the 7 main lines that are going to hold the aft mast up. The 4 thimbles, 2 on the shrouds and 2 on the deck, and then there's a couple of blocks that pull towards the rear. And there's this one that goes to the front that's a little long, and I don't know quite where I'm going to place it and how long it's going to be, so I haven't attached anything on the ends yet. My goal was to put the mast up in all the standing rigging, and then I could place all the various other items, the blocks, the wheelhouse, and everything else in its place after the standing rigging was put in. Using the plans provided in the kit, I determined where I wanted to put these little eyelets in on the deck. Then I placed the little thimbles and the block on the deck, put a lashing or some kind of line between those two and tightened them down. I had to re-seize this one. It was too long, so they're relatively straight across. And now the mast is fairly installed. And that's what I wanted to do, was to get the mast up first, and then I've started putting in my cockpit and some blocks and some other things, and that's what I thought I would do, is figure that out. Now I see I've made 2 mistakes. The first mistake is where I placed this block. Kind of wanted the standing rigging up and running, and so I did that, and I chose a block from up above. I chose the block from up above to run a line through. I fed a line in the little block and ran it down, and the line went from this block on the deck, a double block, all the way up to a block up here, and it looked like it cleared everything. And then I found that I had made a mistake. The mistake was this block here had fallen off in the process of building, so I set it aside in a little pile and forgot about it, and I did a test line from this block down to the one on the deck, and it was in the wrong position. It's supposed to have come off of this one, and now it appears to me this line comes down and it interferes with the shroud. So I may have to move this block back a little bit. I'll double check that. The drawings are kind of unclear. And the second one I found as I was going through double checking everything is that these lines here that tighten the mast to the fore, I said the aft earlier, and bring the mast forward, are running rigging, and they should have been light tan. They call it a natural shade, but it's really a light tan. So I'll take these off and run some thread that is the light tan color and redo both of these blocks here. So I raised both masts, and this is the process I followed. First I created a stable platform by this piece of wood, and then wasn't quite level because of the floor and the rug and the table and the whole buildup of stuff. So I put these little shims here and used my Home Depot laser leveler and got the top of the platform straight. And you bring the laser level and put it in front to make sure there's not a tilt port or starboard, and make sure your boat is square this way as well. And then I raised the level up so that it was level with the water line here. And if you remember earlier in the videos, this was a little tricky because the stern was 20 millimeters lower than the bow, so it kind of sits at an angle. And the deck is curved this way, and it's also curved athwart ships, and so there really is no straight lines on here with the stern being lower. But the water line I really worked at, and you can see there's a little bit of difference here and there where my lines weren't perfect, but essentially this is the straight level water line. Then the laser level has the feature of an up and down arrow, and you put the laser level pretty much perpendicular to the mast, and that helps you set where you want the mast. And this is what I did. You can see it's not quite perpendicular all the way up, but it's pretty close, and when you take the laser level off, it looks pretty square. Then you take the laser level and you put it straight in front of the boat so that it's square to the boat, and you put that, and you make sure the boat's not tilted, and you get your mast set up like this, and with all the lines a little bit loose but not too slack, you get it straight, and then with the fore and aft square and the left and right square, port and starboard square, you lay a little glue in there and hold it until it dries, or you let go if it doesn't sag at all, and then later on you can tighten up these lines so that it looks good. The reason I use the little glue is because if I got it tight with these threads, you may bump them and stretch them, or over time they sag and the mast may tilt over sideways, and there's nobody on deck to straighten these lines as a real sailboat would. So what you do is you put a glue and simulate it being square, and that's how I did it. Not that this is the best way, but that's how I managed to do it. The way I approach it is once I get my mast set, then I start laying all the little gear like these cleats here, and I started tightening up these blocks, and I'm going to put new cleats down here, and I'm going to put cleats down here. And this tan line, I suspect, represents running gear, where you adjust it all along. So there'll be cleats, and you can adjust this as time goes on. Whereas the standing gear, like this black, stays all the time and doesn't adjust. So down here towards the stern, they use these little turnbuckles here, and they're permanent and they're black. But where there's brown, they're adjustable, so I put cleats in there to represent the guys coming along and tightening them up. And I started putting in all the other little attachments. Let me turn this light on here. So this helps hold the mast up, and I put the stovepipe in, and I started putting doodads in, and now I'm going to start building the deck that the masts are up. So now I'm just plodding my way through installing equipment, and I decided to go from the fore and just work my way all the way aft and get that all done. And it's just a bunch of little tasks that I'm slow, I guess. It just takes me a long time. It's better. So I just decided to tie off the little ropes, and so what I did was I wrapped them around the little cleat, and then I created a little jig to create these coiled lines. And as I worked my way down, I glued on these bulwarks and put on this, and see, I coiled up some lines here, and now I'm doing these 3-hole blocks. They're a little tricky. Let me show you. This is really not any great insight, other than the fact that each of these tasks take a little bit of time. I have one little thread on this clip, and the other end of the thread is here laying loose, and I'm threading it through these little blocks. And you can see it's kind of got a twist in there, and I really didn't want these lines to be twisted. And it just takes time to figure out where these go. I anchored them down, and then they got all wrapped around, so I decided to untie them and let them lay loose, and I'll figure out how to terminate them one way or the other. And then you take these little sewing threads, and you want to decide where it goes in and where it goes out. So it looks like you want the thread to go in, so you got to come from the back, and when you turn around, this thing rotates, so you could easily get it the wrong way, which is what I've done multiple times. I think this is the right way. Your line, and pull it through. It kind of looks okay. You've been having trouble getting them twisted because I put them in the wrong little of the 3 holes. And it's got a twist on it now. So you see, you kind of got to figure out what's going on. It looks like it's okay. It's just that it's not fully threaded yet. So that's what this segment is about, just demonstrating that each of these little tasks just takes time. I'm slow and I have to kind of figure out what's going on, and I'm working my way through. So the next video will probably show lots of it complete, but it might be a couple of weeks before I get to the next video session. Pretty much got the deck assembled. There's some doodads to be done, but now I think I'm going to turn my attention to the lifeboat. I first put the frames and the bottom of the boat in. That was kind of tricky. These are all little small parts bouncing around, but I got them glued in. And then I put the main whale on, and then I put the garboard plank on, just like I did on the other boat. And then I measured the distance that was left, and the planks are 3 millimeters, and calculated how many planks would be needed for the widest part. And then it's less distance here in the bow. And just like we did in the first boat, I made a little Excel spreadsheet and determined how wide each of the planks needs to be. I'm having a hard time turning this corner here. I'm getting these edges up. And as you can see here, when I make the curve, it turns up. At least I hope you can see it. Let's see. This edge is higher. And I've sanded them off, but it's getting worse. And it dawned on me what I need to have is spiled wood. So the only thick enough wood to spile I could find was this balsa wood, and it keeps cracking. This is what it needs to look like. I've determined a nice curve, and it would lay flat. But I haven't got any 1 millimeter hardwood, and all I had was the softwood, and every time I go to cut it, it cracks. So then it dawned on me, this technique I used earlier in this video was to spile in this manner, in which you bend the wood edgewise, which was told to be impossible. You should have to look at one of my first videos on planking, where I take a hot iron and I wet the wood and then I steam it, and then when it dries, it has this curve in there. Well, I think my edge bending was successful in that the previous planks here were lifted up, and I can sand them down. And this is the plank that I edge bent, and it's quite smooth here. The following stills depict some of the steps taken towards the completion of this lifeboat. None of these steps were too complicated. I just took some stills as I was working my way along. And it took a little bit of time to get them right. I had to uninstall a few and reinstall the seats and a couple of the little davits for the oars. For the floats, I drilled little 1 millimeter holes in the ball per the instructions, and then decided to paint them gray and let them dry and put a second coat on. And then I drill a 2 millimeter hole for the collars, resulting in 30 of these little floats. The last major task was to create the one sail I'm going to use. Here's the silk span we purchased. 6 sheets of it. It's medium thickness, but it's rather transparent, if you can see that. And we cut it to size, and then we painted it. I followed the instructions from Tom Loria on one of his videos called Making Sails for Ship Models, in which he used silk span. I had a hard time finding silk span, but it's basically a paper product. And I cut out a piece of cardboard, as you can see here, to the shape of the sail I wanted. And following Tom's instructions, I got titanium white acrylic, used these roller brushes here, and I painted the sail white. And then we installed it on the spars. It took a little while to install these spars on the mast and get everything straightened away, and it turns out one of the drawbacks of a paper sail is they tear easy, and you must be very careful. But I think I was successful. There were a lot of little details finishing up the boat, like coiling the lines and making the brooms and painting the buckets. And I wove some baskets and made some fish and created boxes, and you will see all of these in the forthcoming final pictures of the boat. So here is the final product. All finished, except that there was a few details, like I hadn't quite got the net arranged the way I wanted, and the fish kept popping out of the box, and some of the lines weren't coiled right, and it took quite a lot longer, I thought, to actually get to the final product. It was all built, but it wasn't quite arranged right. And once I got it all done, I thought I was going to furl the sails, and I wasn't quite done with that. So I thought I would furl the sails. I used the process of Tom Loria, the one who was saying use the one that suggested using the silk span, and I really enjoyed using that sail. It does look really nice. It was harder to work with than the cloth, but I think the result is nice. If you have any comments about silk span, please put them down below. I'd like to see what your experience has been. So I decided, instead of being done like I planned, I ended up furling the sails. And in the process, I dropped the chain down in the hole, and I took some of the coils, came undone again, and I had to restring some of the lines, because when it was the upper boom, the gaff was lowered. My lines weren't long enough, so I had to restring some more. And that took another day or so to get this thing furled. The furling wasn't too bad, but arranging the boat in the final configuration took quite a bit of time. But here it is, and I'm quite happy with the look. All my boats have sails deployed. This will be my first one furled, and it doesn't look too bad. I'm not sure I like the way that rear end is rising up, but that's just the way it's going to be. It was harder to, I took 2 tries at it and I decided to give up. But it's nice looking, and everything else is pretty much the same as before. So we finally do come to the end of this video. It's about time, huh? I enjoyed making it. Hope you enjoyed watching it. It took a lot longer than I thought. There's a lot of detail. It's a big boat, and I really wanted to do a good job, so I took my time. I also had a lot of family time, and I enjoyed that very much as well. So here it is, and I'll show a few pictures of the boat at the end of this. And if you have any comments, please leave them. I'd be interested in what your thoughts are in silk span or the details or anything else. I read all the comments and try to reply to most of them. So with that, God bless. May the Lord make his face shine upon you, and I hope to see you next year sometime with another video.